Hi bookish friends, my name is Jackie and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of July. Alright, before we dive into the books that I read this month, I just wanted to cover some statistics from the month. So first, there were 6 books on my July TBR, and I read a total of 6 books in the month of July. The total number of pages that I read this month was 1,846, and the shortest book that I read this month was 186 pages, and that was Have I Told You This Already by Lauren Graham. The longest book that I read this month was 448 pages, and that was Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan. Alright, so the genres that I read this month were 5 books that were adult and 1 book that was YA. So I read 3 historical fictions, and then I subdivided this into 1 Regency romance, 1 fantasy historical, and 1 World War II France/1950s historical fiction. I also read 1 contemporary romance, and that I would also classify as women's fiction and literary fiction, 1 comic/graphic novel, and that is a fantasy one, and it had some darker themes in the story, and 1 nonfiction. This was a memoir, and it was composed of personal essays. In terms of the mediums that I read this month, I read 5 audiobooks and 1 ebook. I did not read any books physically, unfortunately, but some of the moods or themes that were in these books included that of being reflective, adventurous, a journey of self-discovery, prejudice, and discrimination. Alright, so this time around, I wanted to go through my wrap-up in a little bit of a different way. So instead of going chronologically in order of which book I read first, I'm gonna go in order of my ratings. So I'm gonna start with my lowest rated books, which I think my lowest rating for the month was 3 stars, and my highest rating was 4 or 4.5 stars. So I'm gonna go with my lowest rated and then all the way to my highest rated. Okay, so the first book that I have to mention is Have I Told You This Already by Lauren Graham. This is a memoir novel written by Lauren Graham, who was one of the 2 Gilmore Girls. She played the older Lorelai Gilmore in that TV show, if you're familiar with it at all, and I just thought that this was okay. I don't know, there was not a lot of rhyme or reason to the personal essays or what was included in this memoir. I didn't love it. It seemed like she was kind of in a bit of a depression or had some unresolved feelings that she hadn't really quite delved into when she was writing this book. I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. I have another book of hers that I really want to read, which is more about her experiences in A Day in the Life, which I think would be more interesting. This just felt like she was adding in some other random stories, and I didn't find it as funny or connect to it as much as I had hoped. It was my last read in the month of July, and unfortunately it was just a little bit of a disappointment. It sent me into a little bit of a slumpy mood coming into the month of August, but hopefully some of my August reads will change that. Alright, another 3-star book for me was The Protector Volume 1 by Trent Mule. This is an indie book that is being released very soon, I think, or has been released recently, I don't quite remember, but it follows Zane, who was born as a demon and he was enslaved as a child. He works for the heir of a very corrupt business empire, and at the beginning of the story he's joining her in attending college. This story is very intense and it covers some very deep topics such as enslavement and the impacts that this can have on an individual. And Zane's past is very dark and sinister. We kind of see how his PTSD is being shown through nightmares and memories throughout the novel. And the illustrations I thought were eye-catching. They really drew my attention. They were in this like black, white, monochromatic style, which I thought was really cool. And it was quite fitting for the darker themes of the story. I think what I liked most about the story was seeing Yulia, the heir that he's protecting, kind of be confronted with the effects of her family's business and understanding how this is impacting other people and the complex relationship that develops between Zane and Yulia. Their relationship evolves so much throughout the course of the story, and we see how they begin as friends and develop into something more. I like the flashbacks that we saw from Zane's perspective, which explored the beginning of their relationship as children and how it has evolved over the years. But I wish there had been some more time for world building in this one. I didn't really feel connected to the world or what was happening. These supernatural angel and demon elements that were at the core of their story were just underdeveloped, and it was never really clarified what was going on. And we just really don't get a lot of explanations on why certain demons could control their powers and others couldn't. I don't know, I just didn't really love this. There were some plot gaps that were present, and the writing style was cohesive, but there was a little bit of awkwardness in it, which made it a little uncomfortable to read at times. You can definitely give it a try if this is something that sounds interesting to you, or if you want to go for a quick graphic novel read, but honestly, it wasn't my favorite. The next book that I want to briefly mention is A Promise to Arlette by Serena Burdick. I did feature this one in my historical fiction readathon blog, so I don't want to go into too many details, but it follows Sydney and Ida Whipple, who seem to be living this idyllic 1950s suburban life in America, and we kind of start to see that there is this photograph that appears on the scene, and we see all the cracks that really exist in their relationship and this life that they've built together. We get a lot of flashbacks into the 1930s and 40s in this one, which I appreciated some of it, and I did like that we built on Ida's backstory and got to know her a little bit better throughout her life. We also see this very complex relationship that she has with her very good friend and sometimes lover Arlette, and the story kind of goes from there. A lot of the focus of the story was in Nazi-occupied France in the 1940s, and I think that this was one that I could compare a lot to The Nightingale, but I think The Nightingale just does something that this doesn't. It really touched me in a way that A Promise to Arlette just fell flat. I just didn't feel as connected to all the characters in this one. I thought that Arlette was complex and interesting, but it just didn't really pay out in the end. And also, all of the sections based in the 1950s were really slow moving and kind of dragged out. I don't know if this was just me, but I didn't personally love this one. This is between a 3 and a 3.25 star rating for me. I don't really know. I'm kind of still crossed between the two. I'm leaning more towards a 3 though, as more and more time has passed. And I think a good marker of showing that I didn't love this book is that the details of it have been fading from my memory really fast. Normally, I don't have a long memory for books anyway, but this has faded faster than most. Alright, moving on to the next book. Now we're entering the category of books that I firmly enjoyed. So these aren't books that I had too many gripes with for the most part. The first one that I want to mention is The Vampire of King Street by Asha Grayling. First, I want to say a big thank you to LibroFM for giving me a free audiobook listening copy of this one. I really enjoyed this so much more than I was expecting because I just didn't have a lot of preconceived notions or ideas going into it. Of course, all of my thoughts on this are my own. I'm not being endorsed to give it a positive rating. So The Vampire of King Street is a gothic debut novel by Asha Grayling, and it's set following Radhika Dhingra in 19th century New York. She is a new lawyer, and her first client is a vampire that has been accused of murder. So in this society, vampires are basically treated as like second-class citizens. They're often butlers, housekeepers, kind of service workers, and the very wealthy households have them. And so the only reason that they're really being tolerated by society is because they have these service roles, and only so long as they follow these set rules. Vampires are seen as less than, and this is something that our main character Radhika can really relate to because her parents were immigrants to New York, so she understands the experience of feeling like an outsider. And her client Evelyn Moore has been accused of murder, and she knows that all the cards are stacked against him, so she has to team up with a journalist friend and a detective inspector to try to prove his innocence and win his freedom. And failure means that he will die, and also that her career as a successful attorney will be over before it's even begun. So I really like this one. I like how he dived into some paranormal history in this, and the social commentary that's in here is really intriguing. There's a lot of discussion of prejudice and discrimination in this story, and I think it's quite a novel concept to have vampires being portrayed as these like servants to humans and show the history of how they were kind of beaten back and how they were dethroned, so to speak, as the like dominant species, which was really intriguing. All of the characters were really exciting to follow. This book kind of keeps you on your toes all the way through. I would say it's like a mix of a historical fantasy and mystery story. We have this like whodunit kind of thing going on, and we don't really know what to think of Evelyn Moore throughout. At some points he seems guilty, and at other points he seems innocent, and we don't really know what to believe. I just found myself absorbed in the mystery of this, and I was really intrigued by it. I liked our main character Radhika. I really felt connected to her struggles as the child of immigrants to the United States, and just her growth throughout the story and how she starts to view things instead of being so black and white in more of the morally gray shades. There's a lot of moral ambiguity within this story, which I appreciated, and we get to see that some of the people that we think of as villains at the beginning might be heroes, and the people we view as heroes might actually be villains. So you never really know. People's kind of ambitions and their drives, all of that dictates their movements, and there are just so many layers of gray within the story. I liked these supernatural elements. I like the vampires in here. It gives you a lot of gothic dark vibes, but in the best way. It wasn't too much, it wasn't overwhelmingly dark, and it doesn't put you in a depressive mood at all, which I appreciated, but definitely one that I would recommend if you're looking for a quick vampire read. I flew through this one as it was under 300 pages. The next book that I want to mention is Surrender of a Siren by Tessa Dare. This is the second book in the Wanton Dairy Maid series, and I read the first book, I believe last year or maybe earlier this year. I think it was actually in January that I read Goddess of the Hunt, the first book, and it's a story about this desperate heiress who is eager to escape a loveless marriage. She jilts her groom and packs up all her things, and she decides that she's going to take a journey to Tortola, and she wants to have a life of her own, unsheltered, unconventional, and basically she just wants to go on an adventure. So she decides that she's going to leave behind her very conventional life and seek it for herself because nothing's been happening to her. She meets the owner of the ship named Gray, and he is dangerously handsome, very interesting, but also a libertine. And at the beginning of the story, she views him as a scoundrel, but the story basically follows their relationship as it evolves over the time and kind of the romance and love that begins to form between the two of them. I loved the setting of this, that we were on a ship throughout. I don't think I've read too many historical romances set at sea, and just that alone was really intriguing. I like the slow burn relationship between Gray and Sophia in this one, and just how their characters evolved over time. I will say I did have a couple of gripes. So Sophia has a false identity all the way throughout the story, and I didn't like that she kept her identity from the main character for so long. I feel like it was really unnecessary and didn't add to the plot. Also, it led to a lot of friction and conflict between the two main characters when there really didn't need to be so much. And I didn't love Sophia's immaturity, just the way that she thought that everything would be okay because they've grown intimate with each other and they've gotten to know each other. So she doesn't think it'll be a big deal to reveal her true identity. I don't know, I just found that frustrating. You can see just how young she is in the story, and she reads as a little bit young sometimes. Or if not young, maybe, then as naive, which I didn't completely love. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. I liked the slow burn romance. I liked our main characters, and the side characters really added to the story and made it fun. Alright, so finally we've made it to like my 4.5 star, the only one for the month, and that is Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan. I absolutely love this one. You can really tell that she puts so much of herself in these stories, and wow, I fell in love with it. It's a contemporary romance, but it's so much more than that. I think it's similar to Unloved by Peyton Corinne in the sense that there are a lot of deeper topics being explored, and they're very well done in this story, just like Unloved. But the story follows Hendrix, who is a 40-year-old woman. She's very ambitious. She has a lot of goals and dreams for her life, and because of this, she just hasn't found a man that's able to keep up with her. It hasn't worked out in any of her past relationships. She thinks she's destined to always be alone until we meet Maverick. Maverick is enchanted with her from their very first meeting. He is a black billionaire, one of the first of his kind, and he has so much influence. I just love how he's able to enter these spaces that are predominantly made up of white men, and he's able to like run things. He is so clever. They both are, and they're both equally as ambitious as the other in very different ways. I appreciate how supportive he is of her business, which supports black women-owned businesses that are trying to start up and get launched. I thought that was really intriguing and great to read about. And what I liked most about Maverick's character is that he doesn't want to change Hendrix at all. He doesn't want to make her want to have a family with him. He doesn't want to make her give up her dreams in order to put him first. He wants to support her in her dreams, which is so rare to see and read about. I think that it was lovely in this book. Hendrix has a lot going on in her own life. Her mother is living with Alzheimer's, and that's putting a big strain in her life. And I like that the storyline was kind of mentioned throughout and played a big role within her character development and the narrative, rather than being something that was just thrown away either at the beginning or the end of the story. I thought that the side characters were really fun for the most part. There were one or two that were really grating to me. Some of the people that Maverick interacts with just were really frustrating to me. I understand that this was because it was supposed to drive a conversation about discrimination and prejudice, especially within these higher echelons of wealth and business venture capitalists, but it was a little frustrating nonetheless. And also we saw Maverick's ex-girlfriend, who they had recently broken up with at the beginning of the story, and that leads to so many complications throughout. I just thought that she was a little bit petty, and she didn't read to me as a woman that was almost 40 years old, just like Hendrix. She seemed a bit immature, which I didn't really love, and I just thought that some of the conflict and chaos that she brought to the story was really unnecessary, but that's just me. I also think that the beginning of the story really dragged out. Like, it takes quite a while to delve into the plot and into the romance, which I kind of get because we are trying to establish what Hendrix's life is like before Mavericks enters it, and just understanding the situation that's going on with her mother, but I found it to be a little bit slow moving nonetheless. Overall though, I still really enjoyed this one. I think I'm going to settle on a rating of 4.5 stars because it was just so deeply moving to me. The descriptions of prejudice and discrimination, as well as all of the discussions of Alzheimer's in this book, really touched me and are things that I'm going to carry with me going forward. So I just wanted to briefly dive into some of my current reads or books that I didn't end up finishing in the month of July. The first one I've actually just finished, so this will technically be an August read, but I wanted to include it here, and that is Astronautical by Brooklyn Stormy. This is a middle grade graphic novel that is set in a sci-fi world of Zephyr, and it follows Max and Larry, who kind of go on this quest to try to save their father after he's been kidnapped by these like supernatural fox creatures, and he's taken to this star's lair. We don't really know what's going on in the story. We just know it's kind of like a quest adventure of them trying to save their father. And I like the world building and development that happens in this one. It takes place like in outer space, so it's definitely got some of those sci-fi aspects going on, but it was pretty easy for me to follow, so I appreciated that. It has some really beautiful illustrations, and that's something that I always appreciate about comics and graphic novels so much. I just really enjoyed this. This would be perfect for middle grade audiences, for younger readers, and it's so easy to follow, and I think that will lend itself well for young readers to fully understand it. I also like how at the end of the comic, she wrote a few pages kind of describing her research and explaining some of the terms that she used throughout. I think this is very helpful and informative, not just for children, but also for older readers who may not be super familiar with all of these space terms that she uses. So overall, I would recommend this one. I had a great time with it. I think it was like 240 or so pages in it, but it was such a quick, light read. I think it's a perfect kind of story to get you out of a reading slump if you've been struggling. I also just wanted to note that this book does fulfill one of the prompts that I picked out from my July TBR. So that was to read a story that featured a star on the cover, and as you can see right here, there's a star right here, and there are actually many different stars which are main characters within the stories, so I think I deserve bonus points for that. Alright, the last one I wanted to talk about today is Vera by Carol Edgarian. I did mention this one also in my historical fiction readathon vlog, and unfortunately I didn't get around to finishing it. I'm currently at about the 100 page mark of the story, but I'm really enjoying it so far. We're finally getting into some of the bigger action that's gonna happen, and the big earthquake that's kind of featured on the cover of this just happened within the story, so there's a lot of fallout coming from that. But essentially the story follows Vera, who is a 15-year-old girl living in the early 1900s in San Francisco, and at that time there was a major earthquake and a major fire, so her life is about to be upended, and we kind of see that she's split between two worlds, that of her biological mother's, who is the madam of a brothel, and that of her adoptive mother and sister. So there's going to be a lot of like grief and loss discussed in this one. I know there were already some very traumatic things that have happened within the story just at the point that I'm at, and I can't wait to see how things continue to unfold. I'll give you all of my final thoughts on this book in my August wrap up, but I just wanted to briefly mention a little bit of an update to give you kind of an idea of where I'm at with this one. I'm really liking this one so far. I've had this on my TBR since 2021, so quite a few years, and this was one of the titles that was picked for me from my TBR jar in the month of July, so I'm hoping that I will finish it in August. I'm about a third of the way through, if you can see that there, so this will hopefully be one that I'll be finishing in the next few days. Alright, so those are all the books that I read in the month of July. What did you read in the month of July? I'd love to hear about any of your thoughts on the books that you read this month. What were some of your favorites? And if you have any thoughts on any of these books that I shared, please leave them in the comments down below as well. I'd love to hear it. I appreciate each and every one of you, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye!